People always assume betrayal comes like thunder, loud, violent, impossible to ignore. But for me, it came in whispers. My name is Caroline Myers, I'm 42 years old, and I built my life in Austin, Texas, brick by brick, dollar by dollar. I own a small chain of boutique wellness studios, something I poured my soul into for over a decade. When people walk through the doors of my studios, they see calming lights, lavender in the air, people finding peace. What they don't see is the years of late nights, unpaid bills, and the grit it took to make it real. When I first met Daniel, I thought I'd finally found someone who understood me. He was charming in that easy, southern kind of way, polished boots, a confident laugh, the type of man who could talk to anyone and make them feel like they mattered. I was in my early 30s, still hustling to expand my first location. He came into my life promising support, promising partnership. He wasn't rich, but I didn't care. I had my own dreams. What I wanted was companionship, someone who believed in me, someone who would stand by me. And for a while, he did. Or at least, it looked like he did. He came to openings, clapped for me when I won small business awards, even bragged about me to friends. But slowly, oh so slowly, the cracks began to show. Daniel never had much ambition of his own. He hopped from job to job, always with excuses. The boss was unfair, the company was falling apart, they didn't know how to use my talents. I told myself it was just a rough patch, that he'd find his footing eventually. But deep down, I think I knew. He was leaning on me more and more, while giving less and less. The nights he'd come home smelling like whiskey, the weekends he'd disappear with vague explanations, the way his compliments turned into criticism, soft at first, then sharper. Still, I stayed. I stayed because I believed marriage was about loyalty, about pushing through hard times. I stayed because I thought love could fix what ambition couldn't. Then came the day everything fell apart. I'll never forget it. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I had just left a meeting with a contractor about opening another studio location in Dallas. I was exhausted but proud, juggling expansion plans and my team's growth. When I pulled into our driveway, Daniel's truck wasn't there. That wasn't unusual. But when I walked into the house, I noticed something chilling. A half-empty closet. His side. His clothes, gone. His guitar. Gone. The watch his father left him. Gone. On the counter sat a single note, scribbled in his messy handwriting, "Caroline, I can't do this anymore. I need more than what we have. Don't try to call me. More than what we had." I stood there, staring at those words, trying to make sense of them. I had given him everything. My time, my loyalty, my love. And he left me, just like that. But betrayal doesn't like to stop at the front door. Within weeks, I learned the truth. Daniel hadn't just left me. He'd left me for someone else. A younger woman. Someone he'd been seeing behind my back for months, maybe longer. The humiliation hit me harder than the loneliness. Friends called me whispering, I saw him out with her. Employees at my studios looked at me with pity in their eyes. My mother tried to comfort me, but I could see the anger in her face every time his name came up. The nights were the worst. I would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, asking myself what I had done wrong. How could I, a woman who had built an entire business from scratch, have been so blind in my own home? I'd go over every fight, every late night, every lie he'd told, wondering how I missed the signs. But what cut deepest was his arrogance. When Daniel finally had the nerve to call me weeks later, he wasn't apologetic. He was smug. He told me this was better for both of us, that he had moved on, and, God help me, he said he deserved half of everything we built. Half. He hadn't built a thing. He hadn't lifted a single brick, signed a single lease, or taken a single risk. Yet here he was, demanding half of my studios, half of my accounts, half of the inheritance my late father had worked his whole life to leave me. That was the moment when heartbreak turned into steel. I cried that first night, but after that call, I didn't cry again. Because I realized Daniel hadn't just left me, he was trying to rob me. And I wasn't about to let him. I called my attorney the very next morning. Emily Price, a woman I had met through the Austin business community, sharp as a razor and steady as a mountain. She listened to my story, then she leaned back in her chair with the faintest smile. "Caroline," she said, "do you remember that prenuptial agreement Daniel signed before your wedding?" My heart skipped. I had almost forgotten. Years ago, before we married, my father had insisted I protect my assets. Daniel, back then, had brushed it off. Signed it without even reading. I hadn't thought about it in years. That was the first time since Daniel left that I felt something other than despair. I felt hope. Not just hope, but power. Because this wasn't just going to be a divorce. It was going to be a battle. And for the first time in a long time, I knew I wasn't the one who would lose. When Daniel first stormed back into my life with his demands, I thought it was only about ego. A bruised man trying to hurt the woman he'd left behind. But I quickly learned it wasn't just about revenge. It was about money. My studios were doing better than ever. I had 4 thriving locations in Austin and was preparing to launch a 5th in Dallas. On top of that, I had recently inherited a significant sum from my late father, money he had spent his entire life earning and carefully setting aside for his family. It wasn't billions, but it was enough to secure my son's future, to ensure my mother could age with dignity, and to give me breathing room after years of relentless hustling. And suddenly Daniel, the man who had walked out with nothing but a scribbled note, decided he was entitled to it all. He strutted into my attorney's office one afternoon, wearing an expensive jacket I knew he couldn't afford without someone else footing the bill. He smirked like the world owed him. And when he sat across from me, he said words that burned into my memory. "Caroline, I gave you the best years of my life. Don't you dare try to cut me out. Half of that money, and those studios, belong to me." Half. Again with the word half. I wanted to laugh in his face. But instead, I let my attorney, Emily, handle it. She was calm, professional, unshaken. "Mr. Myers," she said, "you signed a prenuptial agreement before you married Caroline. It protects her premarital assets, future inheritance, and business holdings. Your claim has no legal standing." For the first time, I saw Daniel's smirk falter. Just a flicker, but enough. But of course, he didn't back down. Men like Daniel rarely do. He began talking about emotional contributions, about how he supported me emotionally while I built my studios. Emily didn't even blink. "Do you have records of financial contributions? Contracts? Investments?" she asked. Silence. It became painfully obvious that his case was built on smoke. But smoke can still suffocate if you don't clear it out quickly. The weeks that followed were grueling. Depositions. Hearings. Daniel spinning wild tales about how he'd sacrificed his own career for mine. How he had been promised half. Every time, I sat there listening, my stomach in knots. And every time, Emily would quietly pull out another document, another clause, another reminder that he had signed away the very rights he was now trying to claim. The hardest part wasn't the courtroom, it was the nights at home. After long days of legal battles, I would sit at the kitchen table with my son, Ethan, helping him with homework while my mind buzzed with worry. I hated that he had to see me like that, tired, tense, distracted. But Ethan, wise beyond his 12 years, would look at me and say, "Mom, Dad doesn't deserve any of it. You worked for this. You'll win." Those words became my anchor. My reason for standing tall every time Daniel tried to drag me down. Then came the day of the big hearing. The one where everything would either collapse or solidify. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and coffee. The judge, a stern man named Judge Hawkins, listened patiently as Daniel's attorney rambled on about equitable distribution and unfair advantage. Daniel sat there beside him, smug again, as if convinced the tide would turn in his favor. I sat across the room, my mother on one side, Ethan on the other. My hands shook under the table, but my face stayed calm. Emily leaned over and whispered, "Trust me. Just wait." Finally, it was our turn. Emily stood, her voice steady but firm. She pulled out the prenuptial agreement, signed, dated, notarized. She read aloud the exact clauses Daniel had brushed off as formality all those years ago. Clauses that explicitly stated he would have no claim over my inheritance, no rights to the studios, no share in the assets I acquired on my own. The courtroom was silent. You could practically hear Daniel's confidence draining out of him. The judge cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and said something I'll never forget. "Mr. Myers, this document is valid. You signed it willingly. It is clear and enforceable. Your claims are without merit." Daniel's face turned pale. His mouth opened as if to protest, but nothing came out. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, warm, steady, powerful. It wasn't just about money. It was about justice. It was about standing up for myself, for my father's legacy, for Ethan's future. But the battle wasn't over yet. Daniel's attorney scrambled, arguing that Daniel had been misled, that he hadn't understood what he was signing. The judge raised a hand, silencing him. "Ignorance," he said firmly, "is not a defense. Case law is clear on this matter." And with that, the gavel came down. I wanted to cheer, to scream, to cry all at once. Daniel had been stopped in his tracks. But as I looked at him, hunched in his seat, fury radiating off him like heat, I knew this wasn't the end. He wasn't the type to go quietly. Still, in that moment, I allowed myself a rare victory. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Because the fortune on the line? It wasn't just money. It was my independence, my dignity, my freedom. And I had just taken the first step in protecting it all. If I thought Daniel would crawl away after the judge upheld the prenup, I was wrong. Losing only made him more vicious. The days following that hearing felt heavier, like a storm cloud had parked itself right above my head. My phone buzzed constantly with new filings, motions, and demands from his attorney. He wasn't letting go, he was doubling down. His tactics shifted from claiming half my fortune to trying to tear me down personally. Suddenly, the courtroom wasn't just about numbers and documents, it was about character assassination. He painted me as cold. He said I had built my business by neglecting him, by being an absent wife. He accused me of being selfish, obsessed with money, unwilling to share what I had. He made me out to be a woman who cared about nothing but herself. Each accusation felt like a slap in the face. I had built those studios by working nights while Ethan slept, by juggling being both mother and entrepreneur. I wasn't selfish, I was surviving. Sitting in the courtroom, I clenched my hands under the table, my nails digging into my palms, just to keep myself from shouting back. But Emily, my attorney, reminded me, the truth is on our side. Let him talk himself into a corner. And he did. The more he spoke, the more contradictions spilled out. He claimed he had supported me financially, but we showed bank statements that proved otherwise. He swore he had invested in my studios, but the paperwork showed every loan and payment came from me alone. He declared he had been promised part of my father's inheritance, but my father's will was crystal clear. Every lie Daniel spun unraveled right in front of the judge. But that didn't mean it was easy to endure. There was one afternoon, in particular, that broke me. Daniel sat across the courtroom, testifying that I was an unfit mother, that my focus on business made me inattentive to Ethan. He said Ethan would be better off with him, that I was too busy, too tired, too ambitious. That cut deeper than anything else he had said. Because my son wasn't just a part of my life, he was my life. I looked over at Ethan sitting quietly with my mother in the gallery. His small hands folded, his eyes watching me. For a moment, fear clawed at my chest. What if the court actually believed him? What if, after everything, I lost the one thing that mattered most? I steadied myself, reminded that this wasn't just Daniel's performance, it was also my chance to speak. When it was my turn, I stood and told the court the truth. About the nights I stayed up helping Ethan with school projects. About how I built my business to give him a stable future. About the weekends we spent hiking, cooking, laughing, building a bond no lie could destroy. My voice shook at first, but then it grew stronger. I wasn't just defending myself. I was defending my son's childhood. When I finished, the courtroom was silent. Even the judge leaned back slightly, almost as if weighing the sincerity in my words. Emily leaned over and whispered, "You just gave them the real Caroline. That's stronger than any document." But Daniel wasn't finished. His next move was nastier. He claimed I had pressured him into signing the prenup. That I had manipulated him, that he didn't understand what he was agreeing to. The judge raised an eyebrow, unimpressed, but Daniel kept talking, desperate now. He described himself as young, naive, blinded by love. He said I had ambushed him with the contract the night before our wedding. My jaw clenched so tight I thought I might crack a tooth. Because I remembered the truth. We had reviewed that agreement months before, with separate attorneys. He had shrugged it off, saying he didn't care, that he trusted me. And Emily had proof. She calmly pulled out the correspondence emails between Daniel and his attorney from back then, outlining every clause in the prenup. Emails where Daniel had written, "Looks good to me." The judge read through them, then looked directly at Daniel. "You had ample time and counsel, Mr. Myers. This argument holds no weight." Daniel's face burned red. For the first time, I saw panic in his eyes. Still, even with the truth on my side, the stress weighed heavily. Every night after court, I would collapse into bed, drained. Some nights I cried quietly, staring at the ceiling, wondering how much more I could take. But then Ethan would crawl into bed beside me, resting his head on my shoulder. "You're strong, Mom," he whispered one night. Stronger than him. Stronger than anyone. And that was enough to keep me going. As the hearing stretched on, Daniel's case grew weaker. Each lie exposed, each contradiction highlighted. But he didn't stop fighting, because it wasn't about winning anymore. It was about making me bleed, making me suffer, dragging me down with him. Emily warned me, men like this don't quit until they've exhausted every angle. But remember, the law is a shield when it's used right. And we've got the shield. So I braced myself for what was coming next. Because the courtroom battle was far from over. Daniel was desperate. And desperate men are dangerous. By the fourth week of hearings, I was running on fumes. The courthouse had become my second home, its beige walls, buzzing lights, an endless shuffle of papers etched into my memory like a scar. Every morning I would steel myself in the bathroom mirror, put on my black blazer, paint strength onto my face, and whisper, "You're fighting for Ethan." You don't get to fall apart. But inside, I was fraying. Daniel's tactics had grown uglier by the day. He dragged out witnesses, old acquaintances who barely knew me, people he convinced to testify that I was too driven or too cold. It was character assassination, plain and simple. Still, Emily kept reminding me, he's grasping. This is the last thrash of a drowning man. Hold on, because we've got something he can't twist. That something was an envelope. Emily hadn't let me see it at first. She said it was better for me to focus on the bigger picture. But one night, after yet another grueling day in court, I cornered her in her office. What's in it? What are we waiting for? She leaned back in her chair, folded her hands, and gave me the kind of steady look only an attorney with a loaded ace can give. It's Daniel's undoing. Trust me, Caroline. Timing is everything. So I did. I held on to that sliver of hope like a lifeline. The next morning, Daniel walked into court with a swagger, his new fiancée on his arm. She always wore dresses just a little too flashy, jewelry that caught the light as if she wanted everyone to notice her. She smiled at me across the room like she'd already won. I wanted to scream at her, "You can have him. Take his lies, his cruelty, his arrogance. Just leave me and my son alone." But instead, I sat tall, smoothed my skirt, and waited. That day's session was brutal. Daniel's attorney argued that my business was marital property because I had grown it during our marriage. He said Daniel was entitled to half, millions of dollars I had built with my bare hands. My chest tightened as I listened, but Emily was calm. She countered with ledgers, tax records, and witnesses who confirmed I had founded my studios before I even met Daniel. The back and forth went on for hours. My nerves felt like frayed wires sparking at the ends. Then Emily stood, smoothed her papers, and said, "Your Honor, I'd like to submit one final piece of evidence." She pulled out the envelope. My heart thudded in my chest. Daniel leaned forward, frowning. His attorney shifted uneasily. Emily walked it over to the judge, who tore it open with a deliberate slowness that made the whole courtroom lean in. Inside was the original prenuptial agreement, yes, but also a series of amendments Daniel himself had signed, initialed, and dated. Amendments that specifically acknowledged that any inheritance or pre-existing business assets of Caroline Myers were to remain solely hers in the event of divorce. Daniel's signature sat at the bottom, bold as the day he wrote it. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the room. Then the judge let out a laugh. Not a chuckle, not a smirk, but a full laugh that echoed off the wood paneling. He shook his head and looked directly at Daniel. "Mr. Myers, it appears you signed away any claim to your wife's fortune years ago. In your own handwriting. Were you hoping we'd all forget?" The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Daniel's face drained of color. His attorney looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. I sat frozen, my breath caught in my throat. Emily placed a reassuring hand on my arm, whispering, "This is the moment. He's finished." Daniel tried to stammer a response, something about coercion, about not remembering, about being misled. But the judge cut him off. "You were an adult, represented by counsel, and fully aware. This argument is baseless. I won't tolerate another second of this charade." He banged his gavel, sealing Daniel's fate in that moment. The relief that washed over me was indescribable. It wasn't just about money. It was about truth, about dignity, about reclaiming the parts of me Daniel had tried to shred. I glanced at my son in the gallery. Ethan's eyes were wide, his small fists clenched like he was holding on to my strength for himself. When I smiled at him, he grinned back, his little face glowing with pride. That smile made every sleepless night, every tear, every ounce of pain worth it. Daniel slumped in his chair, beaten. His fiancée shifted uncomfortably, the shine on her jewelry suddenly meaningless. For the first time, I saw him as he truly was: weak, desperate, and exposed. And me? I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was winning. The envelope had turned the tide, and I knew this battle, this exhausting, soul-crushing war, was finally nearing its end. But as I gathered my papers and left the courtroom, Emily whispered one last warning in my ear: "Enjoy this victory, Caroline. But remember, men like him rarely walk away quietly. He'll try one more time to strike." I nodded, knowing she was right. The fight wasn't over just yet. But for the first time in months, I walked out of that courthouse feeling taller, freer, like the ground beneath me belonged to me again. I wish I could tell you that envelope ended everything. That Daniel saw the writing on the wall, accepted his defeat, and let me and Ethan move on in peace. But men like Daniel don't walk away gracefully. They claw, they bite, they thrash until there's nothing left. And sure enough, just when I thought the nightmare was over, he pulled one last desperate stunt. 2 days after the judge laughed at him in court, I got a thick stack of papers delivered to my door. Another motion. This time, Daniel wasn't coming for my fortune, he was coming for my son. The words blurred as I read them. He was petitioning for full custody of Ethan. Full custody. After years of barely being a present father, after dismissing Ethan's needs for his own ego, now he wanted to rip him away from me. I sank into the couch, my hands trembling, the papers slipping to the floor. "Not my son," I whispered. "Not him." When I called Emily in a panic, she was calm, steady as always. "This is what I warned you about. He's lost on the money front, so he's going after the one thing he knows will hurt you most. But Caroline, he doesn't stand a chance. Not with his record. Not with the evidence we have." Still, my heart ached with dread. Because courtrooms aren't just about truth, they're about presentation. And Daniel was charming when he wanted to be. He could look a judge in the eye and spin a sob story better than anyone I'd ever met. The custody hearing was set for the following week. That morning, I dressed carefully: black skirt, pressed blouse, pearl earrings my mother had given me when Ethan was born. Little reminders that I wasn't just a defendant, I was a mother who had fought through fire for her child. The courtroom was quieter that day, the air thick with tension. Daniel strutted in like he owned the place, his fiancée by his side again. She sat in the gallery, smirking as though she already pictured Ethan in their home. When the proceedings began, Daniel's attorney painted me as unstable, overwhelmed by the pressures of running a business, incapable of balancing motherhood and work. He even brought in a witness, a former neighbor who claimed she had seen me come home late and tired too often. It was laughable, but my stomach churned all the same. Every lie was a dagger thrown in my direction. Then Daniel himself took the stand. He put on the performance of a lifetime. He spoke of Ethan like he was the world's most devoted father, choking up at convenient moments, clutching tissues dramatically. He painted himself as the steady, dependable parent. I wanted to scream. To stand up and list every time he'd missed Ethan's birthdays, every time he'd chosen a night out drinking over tucking his son into bed. But Emily squeezed my arm. "Patience. Let him talk. The truth will catch him." And it did. When it was our turn, Emily presented the records, the missed child support payments, the school forms I'd signed alone, the dozens of text messages where Daniel brushed off Ethan's needs. Then, with quiet strength, I took the stand. I didn't cry. I didn't perform. I spoke simply, truthfully. I told the judge about our bedtime routines, the mornings making pancakes, the way Ethan crawled into my lap when thunderstorms scared him. I told him about the homework spread across the kitchen table, the soccer practices, the scraped knees. I wasn't trying to win a battle. I was just telling the story of a mother and her son. When I finished, the judge leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin. Then he looked squarely at Daniel. "Mr. Myers," he said, his voice heavy with disapproval, "your petition for custody is not only baseless, it's insulting. The evidence overwhelmingly shows that Ms. Myers has been the primary and devoted caregiver of your son. This court will not entertain attempts to weaponize custody as revenge." Petition denied. The gavel struck. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Relief crashed over me so hard it brought tears to my eyes. Ethan was safe. My son was safe. Across the room, Daniel's face twisted in fury. His fiancée whispered something in his ear, but he yanked his arm away, storming out of the courtroom like a child denied his toy. I sat there, trembling, as Emily squeezed my hand. "It's over now, Caroline. Truly over." And for the first time in what felt like forever, I believed her. As I left the courthouse, Ethan ran into my arms, burying his face against my shoulder. "We're okay, Mom," he whispered. "Yes, baby," I said, holding him tight. "We're more than okay. We're free." But deep inside, I knew this battle had left its mark. And as much as I wanted to shut the door on Daniel forever, one final chapter still waited, the moment where I would decide how to use this victory, how to make sure no other woman ever faced what I had endured. The day the judge denied Daniel's custody petition felt like the first sunrise after a long, brutal storm. For months, I had been living in shadows, fear, uncertainty, anger, but now light was breaking through, warm and steady. Walking out of that courthouse, Ethan's little hand wrapped around mine, I felt taller than I ever had in my life. My son was safe, my business was mine, and Daniel had no more claws to dig into us. But victory, I realized, wasn't just about surviving. It was about deciding what came next. For a while, all I wanted was rest. To wake up without a summons taped to my door. To fall asleep without rehearsing courtroom testimonies in my head. To cook Ethan's favorite spaghetti without my stomach nodding at the thought of another hearing. The quiet was healing. Ethan and I started small traditions again. Movie nights on Fridays, pancakes on Saturday mornings. He would fall asleep on the couch sometimes, his head in my lap, and I'd stroke his hair, whispering promises that no one would ever tear us apart again. But I also knew my story wasn't just mine anymore. Too many women in my community had been through something similar, men who tried to strip them of dignity, wealth, or even their children. One evening, I sat with my mother at the kitchen table, sipping tea. She looked at me with the same steady eyes that had carried me through this war. "Caroline," she said softly, "you can take what you went through and let it bury you. Or you can take it and build something stronger." Her words sank deep into me. So I made a decision. I took a portion of my business profits and my inheritance and created something new, the Phoenix Foundation. A nonprofit dedicated to helping women protect their financial and parental rights during divorce. Legal education workshops, emergency funds for attorney fees, support groups, it became a lifeline for women who thought they were alone, just like I once did. The first time I stood in front of a room full of women, sharing my story, I felt a lump rise in my throat. I wasn't a victim anymore. I wasn't even just a survivor. I was proof that no matter how hard someone tried to break you, you could rise from the ashes stronger than before. Word spread quickly. Local newspapers picked it up. A journalist even wrote an article titled, "From Betrayal to Empowerment, How One Nashville Mom is Changing Divorce for Women Everywhere." And Daniel? The last I heard, his fiancée had left him. His debts piled high, creditors circling, his once charismatic smile fading into bitterness. I didn't need revenge. Watching him unravel was enough. But more importantly, I stopped letting him occupy space in my head. I stopped waking up with the weight of him pressing on my chest. I stopped bracing myself for his next move. Instead, my mornings began with Ethan's laughter, my afternoons with the hum of my studios, my evenings with the quiet peace of knowing I was free. One night, as Ethan and I watched the stars from our porch, he looked up at me and asked, "Mom, are we really done with Dad's mess now?" I kissed his forehead. "Yes, sweetheart. We're done. From now on, it's just us, and the life we choose to build." And in that moment, I realized that everything I had fought for, every tear shed in that courtroom, every sleepless night, had led me here, to freedom, to strength, to a future I had carved out with my own hands. This was my victory. Not just that Daniel had lost, but that Ethan and I had won something greater, a life on our own terms. And as I lay in bed that night, the house quiet and safe around me, I whispered to myself, "He underestimated me. But I was never just his wife. I was always more. And now, the whole world knows it too." If my story touched you, if it reminded you of your own strength or gave you hope when things feel impossible, I'd love for you to stay connected. Please like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience, courage, and starting over. Together, we're stronger, and none of us have to walk through the fire alone.